Okay, so like imagine this. You've worked really hard, saved up some money, but then every year it's like your money buys a little bit less.
Yeah.
That's inflation, and it feels like a losing battle. But get this, some experts are saying Bitcoin just might be the answer even for like central banks dealing with this whole inflation
Kind of
problem.
wild, right?
Wild. It's a bold statement for sure. So we're doing a deep dive today into this article. We found that claims central banks might soon have no other option but to buy Bitcoin for their
I
reserves.
know it's a bold claim.
It is. We're going to like unpack why these experts think this is going to happen,
Yeah.
what it could mean for the global economy, the whole shebang.
Yeah. It's really interesting because this challenges how we think of central banking as we know it, right? Like these are the institutions built on controlling traditional currencies. And then you have Bitcoin, this decentralized digital thing operating completely outside their grasp.
It's true. It really is like these two different worlds that are about to collide.
Right.
So for anyone listening who's like, wait, what is Bitcoin again?
Yeah.
Let's start with the basics. What makes Bitcoin so different, so potentially disruptive?
So in a nutshell, it comes down to scarcity. Bitcoin has a fixed supply, 21 million coins. That's it. Done.
Yeah.
No central bank, no government can just print more Bitcoin to like game the system.
Uh-huh.
And that inherent scarcity makes it a really powerful hedge against inflation.
Okay, and with inflation being a top concern right now, it makes sense why people are suddenly so interested in it.
Yeah.
But this article takes it a step further, right?
Yeah.
It mentions an inflationary crash. Can you explain what that means and why it would make Bitcoin even more appealing in that scenario?
Yeah, so you hear inflationary crash, and it sounds a little weird, right?
It
Because
does.
usually crashes mean prices plummet.
Right.
But here we're talking about the value of your money crashing.
Okay.
Like imagine central banks, they're drowning in debt. The only thing they can think to do is print more and more money.
Oh, boy.
And that might seem like a solution at first glance, right? But then it creates this awful cycle. The more money they print, the less your money is worth, leading to this inflationary crash.
It's like they're trying to put out a fire with gasoline, which is how the article put it.
Exactly.
And they're suggesting that Bitcoin is like the only life raft when that happens.
Yeah, in a way, because this is where you really need to understand the difference between Bitcoin and like traditional hedges against inflation, like gold.
Okay, yeah, the article did mention gold.
Yeah.
So let's break that down for our listeners.
Okay.
Because a lot of people see gold as the safe bet when things are uncertain.
Right. And it is seen as a safe haven, but its supply isn't truly fixed. They can always mine more gold. Plus, governments have these huge stockpiles that they can release, and that can totally mess with the price.
So even with gold, which is supposed to be stable,
Yeah.
there are all these external factors influencing the price.
Absolutely.
But with Bitcoin, those factors don't even exist because of the code, right?
So Bitcoin's fixed supply is literally written into its code.
It's like the law.
It is the law,
Yeah.
and that makes it immune to all that external pressure.
Yeah.
So you combine that with its digital nature, and suddenly Bitcoin isn't just a store of value. It could actually become a major player on the global stage.
And that leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive.
All right,
Because the article argues this isn't just about like you and me trying to stash away some savings.
Right.
This is about entire nations recognizing how strategically important Bitcoin could be.
Yeah, this is where it gets really fascinating.
Nations and Bitcoin, it's not exactly something you hear every day. So like how does a decentralized currency play into a whole country's strategy?
So think of it this way, right? Nations are always competing for power on the global stage.
Right. Economic power.
Exactly. And for a long time, that power came from things like gold reserve, control over oil,
Yeah, makes sense.
But this article is saying that Bitcoin, with its limited supply and the fact that more and more people are using it, it could become a whole new kind of power chip in this global game.
Okay, so I get that a country having a lot of something scarce and valuable could give them leverage.
Right.
But then the article takes it even further. It uses this term hash wars.
Yeah, hash wars.
It sounds kind of intense.
It does sound like something out of a movie.
Right.
But basically, it refers to this competition to control Bitcoin mining.
Okay.
And look, you don't need to get into the technical stuff about mining.
Yeah, I don't think I could explain that.
The important thing to remember is that whoever controls most of the computing power that's used for mining, they basically have more influence over the whole Bitcoin network.
So it's almost like having voting rights in this global Bitcoin system.
Exactly. And that's why you see all these countries suddenly trying to become Bitcoin mining hubs.
Yeah.
They're realizing that having a say in the future of Bitcoin could be huge.
And it's not just a theory either. The article mentions MicroStrategy, a company that basically went all in on Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and their value went through the roof.
It's a great example of what can happen when you start thinking of Bitcoin as a strategic asset.
Like a long-term play.
Yeah, not just some quick gamble.
No.
And now imagine a whole country doing that. The potential is enormous, which is why a lot of countries want to get in early.
It's like the early days of the internet, right?
Totally.
The people who saw its potential before anyone else, and now they're the ones calling the shots in the digital world.
Exactly. And just like back then, there are people who are writing off Bitcoin saying it's just a fad or a bubble.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
The article acknowledges that skepticism, but it also addresses those concerns, especially from people who are super into traditional assets. You know,
Like gold.
the gold bugs.
Exactly.
And I get it. Their skepticism makes sense. Bitcoin is still pretty new. It's volatile.
Wow.
It challenges everything we thought we knew about valuable assets.
Right. It's like a whole new way of thinking about money.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The article highlights what those gold bugs and Bitcoin believers have in common.
Okay, I'm really curious about that because on the surface, they seem like total opposites.
Right.
Physical gold versus digital code.
But it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
Both gold and Bitcoin represent this desire for something outside the current financial system.
I see what I mean.
They're both seen as hedges against inflation, a way to hold on to your wealth when governments and central banks are messing things up. They both represent this idea of decentralization scarcity and having control over your own financial future.
So it's not really about what form it takes, gold or code. It's about the idea behind it.
Exactly. Now, that doesn't mean every gold bug is going to suddenly buy Bitcoin. There are still concerns about how much the price swings and all the regulations.
For sure.
But understanding those shared values, I think it helps to see the whole picture more clearly.
It's about looking beyond just the headlines about the price going up and down and all the crazy crypto stories,
Yeah.
and actually understanding why people are drawn to Bitcoin in the first place.
And that's so important because the media doesn't always paint an accurate picture of Bitcoin.
That's
Instead of talking about how it could change finance for the better, we get all these stories about price crashes and illegal stuff. It creates a very skewed perception.
It's like judging a book by its cover.
Right. And when you actually dig into it, you find this elegant system built on complex math, a decentralized network that could make things more transparent and give more people access to financial tools. But yeah, there are risks because there's volatility, but there's also this massive potential.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
So for everyone listening, what stands out to you about Bitcoin now that we've talked about it more?
What are you thinking about?
Are you starting to see how it might actually play a role in this whole world of central banks and global finance?
Because the impact of Bitcoin goes way beyond whether you buy some or not.
Mhm.
We're talking about a fundamental shift in how we think about money, about value, about power.
And that brings us back to the article's big claim. Why central banks might have to start buying Bitcoin.
It's a bold statement, but if you follow the logic, it starts to make sense.
So break it down for us. What's the driving force behind this prediction?
Basically, it comes down to this.
Mm.
If enough individuals, companies, and even other countries start holding a lot of Bitcoin, it creates this domino effect. Central banks, their whole job is to manage their country's money and stay competitive, right? So they might find themselves in a position where they have no choice but to buy Bitcoin too.
It's not that they suddenly love the idea of Bitcoin.
Right. It's more like they have to adapt to survive.
Adapt or die.
Exactly. Think about it. If a country decides to hold some of their reserves in Bitcoin and suddenly the value of Bitcoin goes way up.
They're suddenly way richer.
Exactly. They've got more power to make deals, to get loans, to influence what happens in the global market. And other countries see that happening and they don't want to be left behind.
So it becomes this kind of silent competition, and the ones who got in early are the ones who benefit the most?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And central banks, their job is to protect their country's economic future. So they can't just ignore something like Bitcoin.
Right, they can't just bury their heads in the sand.
They have to at least be part of the conversation,
Yeah.
even if they're not ready to go all in. And the article even suggests that some central banks might already be quietly buying Bitcoin, trying to get ahead of the curve before it's too late.
Wow. So let's say this actually happens. Let's say central banks start buying Bitcoin. Does that mean we're all going to be walking around with Bitcoin wallets, paying for everything with fractions of a coin? I mean, it's a question we're all wondering, right? Like, is this going to change how we use money in our everyday lives?
It could.
Yeah.
But even if central banks and these big institutions get on board, it's not like it'll change overnight. you know.
Right. It's not like we'll all be ditching our credit cards for Bitcoin next week.
Exactly. And the article actually ends on a cautious note. They make a really strong case for why central banks might have to adapt. But they also say, look, any new technology comes with challenges, especially when you're talking about something as fundamental as money.
Yeah, because Bitcoin, it has the potential to make the whole financial system fairer, more transparent.
Absolutely.
But there's also the potential for abuse, right? Like any powerful tool, it matters how we use it.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why it's so important to have these conversations.
Right, to really think it through.
We have to dive into how this technology works, what it could mean for us, both the good and the bad.
Yeah.
We can't just jump in blindly.
It's not just about the tech stuff either. It's about understanding how Bitcoin could impact society, geopolitics, our everyday lives.
Exactly. It's bigger than just the financial experts. This is something we all need to be talking about.
This article, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. It sparks the conversation, but there's so much more to unpack. So for anyone listening who's like, wow, this is a lot, don't stop here. Read the article we talked about. Do some more research. Ask questions. The more we all understand this, the better equipped we'll be to navigate it all.
I agree.
So to wrap things up, we started with this big question.
Central banks buying Bitcoin.
Crazy idea or the future?
The future of money.
We looked at the arguments, the potential impact, but at the end of the day, the future is still unwritten. What do you think? Is this the start of something huge or just a blip on the radar?